Hello and welcome to video lesson 2 for outcome 7a. Today we are going to start getting to know how to use our graphing calculators in order to analyze different graphs. So we are going to use some graphing technology to graph some polynomial functions and then using that graph figure out some of those characteristics. So if you haven't, you're going to want to go and grab a graphing calculator so that you can practice the steps as we work through the lesson. So again, our goal is to simply become familiar with graphing technology. So here it shows you the steps. So you want to turn it on. Again, you might be somewhere else on your page. If you just hit this home button here that's showing up red on the screen, that's what you're looking for. And we want to create a new document. Oh, I went into my document, right? So then that's a mistake. I hit back on home. I want a new document. And we want to add a graph. That's the second one down. And there we go. Now you'll notice that on your calculators that where you enter the function, it shows on the screen here that it's on the bottom. If you look at my calculator, it's on the top where it's blinking. They're usually on the top now, but it's the same idea. That's where you're going to be typing in your functions. So first things first, it's asking us to graph 3x squared minus 2. If you see that right here. So I go to my calculator, and where it's blinking, I hit 3. And I use the letter x on the bottom of the screen, x squared. There is an exponent button here. This little hat button is also an exponent, so hat 2. Now what you need to do is you need to move the cursor off, because anything that you type after that, we don't want it to be an exponent anymore, so I move it over. And then I hit minus, not subtract. I want subtract, not the minus, so subtract 2. And then it says, hit enter to see the graph. And there is our graph. Awesome. It says, notice your function bar has disappeared. You can get back to it by hitting Control and G at the same time. So, Control G. And now it says F2X, which basically means you could type a second function if you wanted to, and put it right on there if you wanted. I like to just graph one at a time, but you can also graph more than one. There's some other things that you might want. If you like grid lines, we can figure out how to do that. It says move your cursor to a blank part of the graph. So if I just move my little cursor there to a blank part of the graph and hit Control and then menu. I want to choose number 2, hide/show, so hit 2. And then we want lined grid, which is number 4. And there we go, I got a grid. So if that helps you to analyze your graph, you're more than welcome to use that. Sometimes you might want to zoom in or zoom out so that you can see it a little bit easier. So again, we're going to hit Control and then Menu. We want the zoom, so that's the 4th one down. And there's lots of different ways you can zoom. So I would encourage you right now to pause the video and just play around with some of them. Right? You can zoom it in if I hit 3. I enter it in, right? It gets bigger and bigger and bigger. If I want, I can get it back to where it was. So Control Menu, and I want to zoom. I can zoom and normal standard zoom. If I hit 5, it goes back to normal. So zoom can be really, really helpful if you know how to use it. If you ever end up not knowing what's happening, hit escape. Hit escape as many times as you want, and then go back to home if you need, but hitting escape is a nice troubleshoot if you run into errors. it says that we want to enter another graph, but I'm just going to use this one right now and just show you how to use the trace. So another really important key here is how to trace things. We're going to be using it for the next 3 outcomes. So if you hit menu, and the 5th one down says trace. Then I want to graph trace. And you can see that it's blinking there. So if I move it around, it will show me different points on that graph. Right there is a point that's really, really important. It says 0. So it tells me one of my x-intercepts there on the x. Right? It says 0.816. That is the first x-intercept. I can always move it, right, if I move it to the other side. Oh, right there it says the y-intercept. So my y-intercept is at -2. If I move it a little bit more, there's my other 0, which again just means x-intercept. And you can find all sorts of different points that are on there. A common question is, right when I get to this one, it says -0.86 on the x, but then on the y it says 1.3 e to the -12. That just means that is 0.000000011 times and then 13. Really, really, really close to 0. So whenever you see that e to the negative whatever, you can just assume that full value is 0. So that's the trace. It can really help you find x-intercepts, y-intercepts, sometimes for parabolas especially, a max or a min when you find your domain or your range. So now we are going to graph a couple things and find out some values about it. So again, I want to restart. I'm simply going to hit home. And then I'm going to enter a new document. Do I want to save those ones? No. I'm going to add a graph. And now I'm going to type what I see there. X to the power of 2. Move the cursor over. Subtract x. Subtract 6. I'm going to hit enter. And there's the graph. I'm going to add in some grid lines. Control menu. Hide show. I would like, oh, it's just easier to use the numbers. So hide show. Lined grid. There it is. So if I look at that graph, it looks like there are 2 x-intercepts. I'm going to trace them in a second to find them. So it looks like there's 2 x-intercepts. Looks like there's 1 y-intercept. The end behavior looks like it's starting over in that quadrant and ending up in this quadrant. So that is 2 and that is 1. So my end behavior is from 2 to 1. My domain, which again is from left to right. Farthest left is off the page, which would be an arrow, so -infinity. Farthest right, again, is off the page, so that would be an arrow, so +infinity. Range we read from bottom to top. The bottom, it looks like it tells me there that it is -6.67. So that's the bottom. And top is infinity. There's would be arrows. I am going to trace it and double check that in a second. And in terms of turning points, that parabola goes down until it hits that minimum value and then goes back up. So there is 1 turning point. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to trace that and just see what I find. So I go control, menu I believe. Nope. I'm going to escape. I'm going to hit menu. That's where it is. So it is under trace is 5. Graph trace is 1. So the minimum is, oh, I was wrong, right? So if you go and you check, that minimum is at 0.5 and -6.25. So my range I need to change so I can adjust to that minimum value, negative 6.25. That's why it's always important to trace. Now I can find my y-intercepts if I move. So there we go. There's our first one. It looks like it's really nice on the graph. It is at 3 and 0. And if I move it over and I find the other one, it is at negative 2 and 0. So 3, 0, and negative 2, 0. Now we're going to find that y-intercept. So there it is, at 0, negative 6. So 0, negative 6 is my y-intercept. So basically what we did yesterday, just now using that graphing calculator. If you're feeling confident, by all means, you can start practice 2. I am going to do one more just to remind you how to do all of these steps. So again, I'm going to go home. I'm going to create a new document. I do not want to save. I'm going to add a graph. And that's the graph that I need to add. Negative 3x cubed subtract 4x plus 2. There's the graph. So just by looking at it, it looks like there's one x-intercept. Looks like there's one y-intercept. In terms of the end behavior, looks like this graph is starting up in there and ending in there. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So it looks like it is from 2 to 4. In terms of the domain, which is from left to right, farthest left is off the page, so that'd be negative infinity. Farthest right is on the bottom off the page, so positive infinity. Range is read from the bottom to top. Bottom goes off the page, so negative infinity. Top goes off the page, so positive infinity. And in terms of turning points, if you trace that with your finger, the whole way down, it is always decreasing, going down, so there are none. So all I gotta do is do a quick trace, and let's figure out the x and the y-intercepts. So I hit menu, and I want to trace. I want to graph trace. So it right away started me off on the y-intercept. If I move it, you can see right there the y-intercept is at 0 and 2. And the x-intercept is at 0.437, and then 1.4 e to the negative 12. Again, we don't worry about that e to the negative 12. So my y-intercept is 0.437. So 0.437 at 0. My y-intercept is at 0 and 2. Now that is practice 2. Sorry, lesson 2. Now it's time to try some on practice 2.